My name is Clara Monroe, and for the better part of 67 years, I have lived a life measured in the quiet turning of pages and the patient blooming of roses. I was a librarian in our small town of Havenwood, Oregon, for 4 decades before retiring to a life of tea, books, and the gentle rhythm of tending my garden. My world has always been a contained and peaceful one, its center held steady by one unwavering constant, my daughter, Sophia. We were more than mother and daughter. We were a constellation of two, orbiting each other in a universe we had built for ourselves after my husband, Robert, passed away when Sophia was just 10. Our bond was woven from late-night conversations over mugs of hot cocoa, shared secrets whispered in the salty air of our coastal cottage, and the easy, unspoken understanding that comes from navigating grief together. She was the sun in my sky, bright and brilliant, and I was the soil that had nurtured her roots, proud to watch her grow. This story, however, is not about the life we built, but about how it was nearly dismantled. It does not begin with the phone call that fractured my world, but 2 years earlier, on a crisp autumn evening when the maple leaves were turning to fire and Sophia brought home a man named Marcus Thorne. "Mom, he's different," she had said on the phone that afternoon, her voice humming with a kind of incandescent joy I hadn't heard in years. "He really listens. He sees me." I wanted that for her more than anything. Sophia, at 30, was a successful graphic designer in Portland, sharp and creative, with a heart as open as the Oregon sky. She had shouldered so much responsibility after Robert's death, becoming my little partner in life, and I ached for her to find a love that was as deep and true as the one she gave so freely. To celebrate, I'd spent the day making my signature salmon chowder, a recipe passed down from my mother, rich with cream and dill and the comfort of home. I set our old oak dining table with my best stoneware and lit candles that cast a warm, flickering glow across the room. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my apron, took a deep breath, and opened the door to a man who was the very picture of polished perfection. Marcus was tall and handsome, with dark hair that fell just so over his forehead and a smile that seemed engineered in a lab for maximum charm. He presented me with a bottle of expensive Willamette Valley Pinot Noir and a bouquet of stargazers, my favorite. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth as river stone. "Sophia has told me so much about you. It's an honor to finally meet the woman who raised such an incredible person." The compliment felt practiced, a line delivered with flawless timing, but Sophia was beaming beside him, her hand tucked in his, and her happiness was a balm to my nascent cynicism. I invited them in, my home filling with his easy laughter and Sophia's radiant energy. Throughout dinner, Marcus was impeccable. He asked thoughtful questions about my time at the library, listened with rapt attention to stories about Robert, and praised the chowder with an enthusiasm that felt almost too effusive. He spoke of his work in sustainable finance, a field that sounded both noble and conveniently vague, and he recounted his travels with a storyteller's flair. "Your mother is a treasure, Sophia," he said as he helped clear the dishes, refusing my protests. "You must be so proud of the life you've built here." I was proud. But as the evening wore on, a small, cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. It was in the way he spoke about Sophia's accomplishments as if they were assets he was acquiring. It was in the way he steered the conversation, effortlessly, back to himself. And it was in the way his eyes lit up, with a flicker of something more than polite interest, when Sophia mentioned Titterpool Cottage. Our cottage on the coast was more than property, it was our sanctuary. A small, cedar-shingled haven nestled in the dunes, it had been in my family for 3 generations. It was where Sophia took her first steps on the sand, where we'd spent every summer reading books on the porch and watching storms roll in over the Pacific. It was the keeper of our most precious memories. "It sounds idyllic," Marcus had said, leaning forward. "A place with real history. Real value." The word value hung in the air, clinical and cold. "He's just trying to connect with our traditions," I told my sister, Helen, on the phone the next day, trying to convince myself as much as her. "That's a good thing, Clara," she'd said. "It means he's serious about being part of the family." I tried to hold on to that thought, to quell the unease that reminded me so much of the early days with my own father, a man whose charm had been a beautiful veneer over a hollow core. Over the next few months, I watched Marcus's influence spread through Sophia's life like an invasive vine. Our daily check-in calls, once a cherished ritual, became sporadic. Lunch dates were canceled at the last minute. Marcus thinks I should be more present in our relationship, she explained. He says successful partnerships are built on prioritizing each other above all else. It was the language of a self-help book, but the subtext was clear: above everyone else. He had opinions on her friends, whom he deemed not ambitious enough, on her freelance projects, which he felt were distractions from her career, and, most subtly, on her relationship with me. The first real crack appeared 6 months later. I learned of their engagement not from a joyful call from my daughter, but from a perfectly curated photo on Instagram. Sophia's hand, adorned with a diamond so large it looked theatrical, was resting on Marcus's. The caption read, "The beginning of our forever." I said yes. My heart seized. I stared at the screen, the cheerful congratulations from friends and strangers blurring through a sudden film of tears. My daughter was engaged, and I was finding out alongside the rest of the world. I called her, my hand trembling. "Oh, Mom. I'm so sorry." Her voice was a breathless torrent of excitement. "It was a total surprise last night. He rented a private room at the Arbor, and there were roses everywhere, and then our families were there to celebrate." She stopped abruptly. "Our families," I echoed, the knot in my stomach now a cold, heavy stone. There was a beat of silence. "Well, his parents and his brother. It was all very last minute. He wanted it to be an intimate surprise. We were going to call you first thing this morning, I swear." "Congratulations, my love," I said, forcing a warmth I did not feel. "Tell me everything." She did. She gushed about the ring, the proposal, the surprise. She told me Marcus's mother had already started a binder for wedding planning and that they were thinking of a summer ceremony. I listened, my heart breaking a little more with each detail I hadn't been a part of. "So, will there be an engagement party?" I asked, trying to find my place in this new narrative. Another pause. "Mom." "About that. Marcus's family, they're quite traditional. They have their own way of doing these things. His mother is hosting a small gathering at their club next month." "I'd love to be there," I said softly. "Well, that's the thing," Sophia said, her voice strained. "It's really just for their side of the family and a few of our couple friends. Marcus feels it's important we honor his family's traditions to start things off on the right foot. You understand, don't you? We'll do something special, just us soon." That soon never came. The wedding planning became a fortress I couldn't penetrate. Sophia would offer snippets of information. They'd booked a historic hotel in the gorge. They'd hired a famous photographer, but my offers to help were gently rebuffed. Marcus's mother has it covered, or Marcus has a specific vision for it. I was being relegated to the role of a distant spectator in the most important event of my daughter's life. The final, devastating blow landed on a rainy Tuesday evening. "Mom," Sophia began, her voice unusually formal. "Marcus and I have been doing a lot of reading about healthy marital boundaries." I braced myself. "Oh." He pointed out that my reliance on you for emotional support, it's a form of codependency. He thinks, for our marriage to thrive, we need to establish ourselves as a primary unit, separate from our families of origin. The clinical, detached language was all Marcus. He was feeding her poison and calling it medicine. "Sophia, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Talking to your mother isn't a pathology. It's love." "But is it?" she countered, and I could hear the doubt he had planted in her mind. He showed me articles about how enmeshed relationships between mothers and daughters can undermine a husband's role. "I don't want to be that kind of wife, Mom." He was systematically cutting her lifelines and making her believe she was holding the scissors. "So what does this mean?" I asked, though I already knew. "It means we need some space. Less frequent contact." And she hesitated, the next words clearly tasting like ash in her mouth. Marcus thinks it would be a good symbolic step for us to spend the holidays with his family this year. To start our own traditions. The holidays. Every Christmas since Robert died, we had our traditions. We'd drive to the coast, light a fire in the cottage, and walk on the winter beach, our breath pluming in the cold air. The thought of that cottage being empty on Christmas Eve felt like a physical pain. I see, I whispered. Is there anything else? Actually, yes, she said, her voice dropping lower. We were talking about the cottage. My blood ran cold. Marcus feels uncomfortable there. He says it's so full of your history with Dad and with me that he feels like a guest, not like family. He pointed out that since I'm going to inherit it anyway, it creates a complicated power dynamic. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. What are you asking, Sophia? We're not asking you to sign it over, she said quickly. Of course not. But he thinks it would be better for our future if we bought our own vacation place. Something that's just ours. He doesn't want to feel like he's living in my past or under your influence. Under my influence. In the place that held the very soul of our family. I ended the call with a hollow promise to think about it, my mind reeling. This wasn't about boundaries or new traditions. This was about erasure. Marcus wasn't just marrying my daughter. He was trying to acquire her, stripping her of her history, her support, her very self, until all that was left was a woman who belonged only to him. That night, I did not cry. I sat in my quiet library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and leather, and I made a decision. I had spent my life as a librarian, a keeper of stories and a seeker of facts. If Marcus Thorne had a story, I would find it. And I had a feeling it wasn't the one he was telling my daughter. My search began online, a quiet, methodical descent into the digital breadcrumbs Marcus had left behind. It took less than a week to find the first thread. A mention in a Seattle Society blog from 5 years prior, announcing his engagement to a young woman named Isabel Lau, the heiress to a successful chain of boutique hotels. I found their wedding registry, filled with extravagant items, and then nothing. The engagement was quietly called off a month before the wedding. I hired a private investigator, a discreet man in Portland with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor named Mr. Davies. Find out why that engagement ended, I told him. And see if there are any others. 2 weeks later, he called me. The story he laid out was chillingly familiar. Marcus had isolated Isabel from her family, convinced her to add him to her business accounts, and tried to persuade her to invest a significant portion of her inheritance in one of his sustainable ventures. Her father, a shrewd businessman, grew suspicious and did his own digging, uncovering Marcus's staggering personal debts and a history of failed businesses propped up by investors who never saw a return. And Isabel wasn't the first. Before her, there was Gabriela Ortiz in San Francisco, whose family owned a vineyard in Napa. That relationship ended when her brothers discovered Marcus had been attempting to use her trust fund as collateral for a personal loan. Marcus wasn't a suitor, he was a predator with a playbook. He targeted successful, intelligent women with family wealth, charmed them with a performance of modern sensitivity, and then systematically dismantled their support systems before making his move on their assets. Sophia, with her thriving career and her expected inheritance of a prime piece of coastal property, was simply the next chapter. The day I received Mr. Davies's final report was the day everything changed. Because the most shocking discovery wasn't about Isabel or Gabriela. It was about Marcus's own family. His grandfather, Edward Thorne, had been a prominent lawyer in Oregon in the 1980s. A lawyer who had been disbarred for embezzling funds from a client's estate. The client's name was Henry Monroe, my late husband's father. Edward Thorne had systematically drained a trust that was meant for Robert and his brother, money from the sale of my husband's family's timber business. The theft had financially ruined the Monroe family, forcing Robert to abandon his dream of going to architecture school and take a job at a lumber mill to support his parents. The stress and shame of it had haunted him his entire life. I sat there in my quiet living room, the report in my trembling hands, and I understood. This wasn't a coincidence. Marcus hadn't just stumbled upon Sophia. He had targeted her. The name Monroe, the connection to Oregon, the potential for remaining assets she must have known. He was trying to finish what his grandfather had started, picking the bones of my family clean. The rage that filled me was cold and clear, a perfect, righteous anger. He had underestimated me. He had seen a quiet, retired librarian, a grieving widow, a lonely mother. He hadn't seen the woman who had held her family together through tragedy, the woman who had raised a brilliant daughter on her own, the woman who knew how to find the truth buried in the archives. He was about to learn. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning. I was in my garden, pruning the last of the summer roses, the thorns catching on my gloves. Sophia's name flashed on the screen, and for a heart-stopping moment, I felt a surge of hope. Then I remembered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was distant, automated. "Hello, darling. How are you? I'm calling to let you know Marcus and I were married yesterday." The garden shears fell from my hand, clattering on the stone path. The world went silent, the buzz of the bees and the rustle of the leaves fading to a dull roar in my ears. "Yesterday? But the wedding was planned for next summer." "We decided to elope," she said, the words sounding alien on her tongue. Marcus felt a big wedding was too performative, too much pressure. "We found a lovely little chapel on the coast and just did it. It was very romantic." Her voice was a perfect recital of a script he had written for her. She listed the attendees, his parents, his brother, two of their couple friends. A small, curated audience for the final act of her isolation. "That sounds lovely, Sophia," I managed, my voice a stranger's. "I'm so happy for you." "Thanks," she said, a hint of relief in her tone that I hadn't made a scene. "Oh, and the reason I'm calling Marcus and I were hoping to spend our honeymoon at Titterpool Cottage. We thought it would be a perfect, quiet getaway. Could you mail us the keys?" There it was. The purpose of the call. Not to share her joy, not to apologize for the exclusion, but to request access to the prize. To the one thing of tangible value that I still held. "The keys to the cottage," I repeated slowly, my mind suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Yes. Marcus is really excited to spend some time there. He was even talking about getting an official appraisal done, for insurance purposes. An appraisal. "Of course." "Sophia," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "When you say you were married, do you mean you had a ceremony, or that you are legally husband and wife?" "Both. We signed the papers at the courthouse last week." "Why?" "Just wondering," I said. "You didn't think to invite your mother to witness either of those events?" A frustrated sigh. "Mom, please don't be dramatic." This was Marcus's wish, to keep it about us. "And after our talk about boundaries, I thought you'd understand that this is part of us building our own life." I did understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that my daughter had married a con man who had convinced her that shutting out her own mother was a healthy choice. I understood that he had finally succeeded. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice turning sweet as poison. "I'll make sure you get what you need for your honeymoon." After I hung up, I sat among my roses for a very long time, the thorns on their stems looking like tiny, beautiful weapons. Marcus Thorne had followed his predatory pattern to the letter. But he'd made a critical miscalculation. He assumed the quiet librarian would simply retreat to her books and her garden, heartbroken and defeated. He never imagined she would go to the archives. I spent the next 3 days assembling my wedding gift. It was not an act of revenge, but of restoration. It was a gift of truth, of history, of liberation. On Friday morning, I drove into Portland. Sophia and Marcus's apartment was in a sleek, modern building that felt as cold and impersonal as their relationship. The gift was wrapped in simple, elegant silver paper, tied with a deep blue silk ribbon. Inside was not a toaster or a set of crystal glasses, but a handsome leather portfolio. I placed it on their doorstep with a small, handwritten card that read, "Dearest Sophia and Marcus, welcome to the family. Every marriage should be built on a foundation of truth. With all my love, Clara." Then I drove home, brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea, and waited for the story to finally be read. The call came at 2:17 p.m. It was Sophia's number, but it was Marcus's voice, raw and unhinged, his carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "You manipulative old witch. This is slander. I'll sue you for everything you have." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. "Hello, Marcus. I take it you've opened your wedding gift. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "And what will you tell them?" I asked, my voice as calm as a placid lake. "That your new mother-in-law gave you a portfolio containing public records? Court documents from your grandfather's disbarment hearing? Old newspaper articles detailing the financial ruin of the Monroe family? I believe those are all matters of historical fact." In the background, I could hear Sophia's confused, tearful voice. "Marcus, what is she talking about? What is all this?" "She's insane," he shrieked. "She's making it all up to ruin us." "Am I, Marcus?" I continued, my voice level. "Did I also make up the sworn affidavits from Isabel Lau and Gabriela Ortiz, detailing your identical patterns of seduction and financial manipulation?" Mr. Davies, my private investigator, was very thorough. "Their stories are remarkably consistent." The screaming stopped. A choked, strangled sound took its place. The sound of a cornered animal. "The best part, I think," I went on, "is the report from the forensic accountant. He traced the funds your grandfather embezzled from my husband's family. It turns out, after Edward died, the remaining assets were moved into a series of offshore accounts. Accounts that you, Marcus, have been accessing for the last decade. You've been living on my family's stolen money." Silence. Thick, damning silence. In the background, Sophia was sobbing now, a heartbroken, wounded sound that tore through me. "But here is the real gift, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "According to the estate lawyer I consulted, since Robert was the rightful heir to those funds, his estate now has a legal claim to every last penny. And since Robert's sole heir is his daughter, Sophia, all of that money, plus interest, belongs to your new wife." I could almost hear his mind racing, the gears grinding as he processed the new reality. He hadn't married an heiress. He had married his family's biggest creditor. "Oh, and Marcus," I added as a final touch. "The keys to Titapool Cottage are in the portfolio as well, tucked into the front pocket. I imagine you and Sophia will have a great deal to discuss on your honeymoon. Enjoy the view." I hung up the phone. I walked out to my garden, the afternoon sun warm on my face. The house of lies Marcus Thorne had so carefully built had just been demolished by a librarian with a library card and a righteous cause. Now it was up to Sophia to walk out of the rubble. She arrived on my doorstep 2 days later, a ghost of herself. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale and drawn. She carried a small overnight bag and the leather portfolio. She didn't say hello, just walked into the kitchen and sank into a chair at the old oak table. "He's gone," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "He left yesterday morning. Packed a bag and said he couldn't live with a woman who would believe her toxic mother over her own husband." I placed a mug of chamomile tea in front of her. Her hands were shaking as she wrapped them around its warmth. "He told me it was all a coincidence," she continued, staring into the mug. "The name, the family history. He said you'd twisted it all to fit your narrative because you were jealous of our love." She let out a hollow, bitter laugh. "Our love." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it made my own heart ache. "But after he left, I found his old laptop. The one he said had crashed. I took it to a repair shop. They recovered the hard drive." She pushed the portfolio across the table and opened it. On top of my carefully assembled documents, she laid a sheaf of freshly printed emails. They were between Marcus and an offshore financial advisor, dated 3 years prior, long before he had ever met her. In them, he explicitly discussed the Monroe heir as a long-term asset acquisition strategy. He had researched her, studied her social media, learned her routines. Their accidental meeting at a Portland coffee shop had been a meticulously planned ambush. "He had a file on me, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "On my finances, my job, my friendships. Even on you. It listed you as primary obstacle, emotionally dependent, leverage point, the cottage. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold as ice. I called Isabel Lau, Sophia said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. And then I called Gabriela Ortiz. Their stories, Mom. It was like they were telling me my own future. He used the exact same phrases, the same excuses, the same promises. She finally met my eyes. How did I not see it? How could I have been so blind? You weren't blind, my love, I said softly, squeezing her hand. You were hopeful. You wanted to believe in the beautiful story he was telling because you have a beautiful heart. That is not a flaw. She shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. I let him turn me against you. I shut you out of my wedding, my life. I almost gave him our cottage. The words were a confession, heavy with shame. But you didn't, I said firmly. He underestimated you, Sophia. He underestimated us. He thought that by cutting the vine, the flower would wither. He didn't realize the roots were strong enough to grow back. For the first time in 2 years, a flicker of the old Sophia, my fierce, resilient daughter, sparked in her eyes. What do we do now? I smiled, a real, genuine smile. Now, I said, we get you a very good lawyer. And we take back everything that belongs to our family. The legal battle was not a battle at all, it was a rout. Faced with recovered emails, the testimony of 2 other women, and a mountain of financial evidence, Marcus's case collapsed. The marriage was annulled on grounds of fraud in less than a month. The civil suit to recover the embezzled funds was settled quickly, with the courts placing a lien on every known Thorne family asset. But for Sophia, the true healing wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the slow, quiet work of reclaiming herself. We spent the autumn at Titapool Cottage, just the 2 of us. We walked the misty beaches, lit fires in the old stone hearth, and talked for hours, rebuilding the trust that had been so cruelly broken. We tore up the wedding photos she had printed, and in a cathartic ritual, we burned them in the fireplace, watching the image of his perfect, lying smile turn to ash and smoke. She found her anger, a clean, sharp anger that burned away the last vestiges of shame. She poured it into her work, creating a series of powerful designs for a local women's shelter, her art more vibrant and honest than ever before. She reconnected with the friends Marcus had pushed away, apologizing with a humility and grace that made me prouder than I had ever been. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the Pacific, painting the sky in strokes of lavender and gold, she turned to me. You know, she said thoughtfully, the wedding gift you gave him was a collection of truths. But the gift you gave me was my freedom. You were always free, my love, I told her, my voice thick with emotion. You just needed a map to find your way back home. She leaned her head on my shoulder, just as she had when she was a little girl, and we watched the first stars begin to prick the darkening sky. The wind coming off the ocean was cold, but I felt nothing but warmth. The constellation of 2 was whole again, brighter and stronger for having navigated the darkness. Our story had been threatened, a chapter nearly stolen and rewritten by a villain, but we had found our way back to the truth, back to the page that mattered. And we knew, with the certainty of the rising tide, that we would write the rest of it together.